The sun rose over the city, casting a warm glow across the airport. People hurried along the terminals, rolling their suitcases and checking their boarding passes. Among the crowd was Maya, a skilled surgeon in her early 30s. She moved calmly, her steps precise, and carried a small bag that held her essentials. Maya had just finished attending an important medical conference and was looking forward to returning home to rest. She had booked a first-class seat for the flight. It was a special treat for herself after months of hard work at the hospital. As she walked toward the boarding gate, she noticed the usual hustle of travelers. Some were excited, talking loudly on their phones. Others were tired and dragged their bags slowly along the floor. Maya moved with ease, her posture straight and confident. She greeted the airport staff politely as she passed. Meanwhile, in the first-class cabin of Flight 712, Robert, a businessman in his 40s, sat in his assigned seat near the window. He adjusted his tie and glanced around the cabin, already annoyed by the noise of passengers settling in. Robert liked order and control, and he expected everything to match his personal sense of comfort. He noticed people walking past his seat and immediately focused on the newest passenger entering the cabin. Maya stepped into first class with a calm smile, greeting the flight attendant. She placed her small bag in the overhead compartment and sat down next to the window. Robert looked at her, feeling a sudden sense of irritation he could not fully explain. Her presence seemed to disrupt the calm he had imagined for his flight. The flight attendant approached, asking Robert if he needed anything before takeoff. He waved her off, saying he was fine. Then he leaned slightly toward her and whispered in a tone meant to be commanding, "That seat next to me, is it really first class?" The flight attendant paused, slightly uncomfortable. "Yes, sir. She has a confirmed first-class ticket, just like yours." Robert frowned. He could not believe it. In his mind, first class should feel exclusive, and he did not want to share it. He looked at Maya, who was quietly arranging her things. She noticed his gaze but did not react. She had learned long ago that some people's judgment said more about them than it did about anyone else. Robert muttered under his breath, more to himself than anyone else, "I should not have to sit next to her." He called the flight attendant again, this time louder. "Can she move somewhere else? I do not want her here." Maya looked up at him calmly. Her dark eyes met his, and her voice was clear and steady. "Sir, I have a ticket for this seat. I am allowed to sit here. I would like to enjoy a peaceful flight." Robert was taken aback. He expected her to be nervous or to argue, but she remained composed. He blinked and tried to find words to argue, but nothing came easily. The cabin felt quiet, as if everyone sensed the tension. Some passengers glanced at them with curiosity. Maya turned her attention back to her bag and began reading a small booklet she had brought along. She did not seem bothered by Robert's frustration. Her calm attitude made the businessman increasingly uneasy. He shifted in his seat, realizing that his attempts to disturb her peace were not working. The flight attendants continued their preparations for takeoff, offering drinks and making announcements. Maya sipped her water quietly, occasionally glancing out the window at the clouds below. Robert stared at her, trying to convince himself that he should be the one in control of the situation. Yet he could not ignore the calm confidence she carried. As the plane began to taxi toward the runway, Maya adjusted her seatbelt and smiled politely at the flight attendant. She was ready for the journey, fully prepared to remain composed no matter what happened. Robert, on the other hand, felt a mix of irritation and confusion. For the first time, someone had refused to be intimidated by him. The engines roared to life and the plane began to lift off the ground. Maya looked out the window, enjoying the view of the city shrinking below. She felt a sense of peace, knowing she had handled the situation calmly. Robert remained silent, staring straight ahead, realizing that the flight was not going to go exactly as he had imagined. Maya's presence in first class was simple and unassuming, yet it already changed the atmosphere of the cabin. Passengers settled into their seats and the journey began. The stage was set for an encounter that neither Robert nor Maya would soon forget. The plane had reached cruising altitude, and most passengers were beginning to relax. Maya had tucked her small bag under the seat in front of her and opened a magazine she had brought along. Her calm presence made her surroundings feel peaceful. She sipped her water slowly, enjoying the gentle hum of the aircraft. Across the aisle, Robert's mood had not improved. He sat stiffly in his seat, his hands folded over his lap. He looked at Maya, feeling a growing sense of irritation that he could not quite explain. In his mind, first class was supposed to be a place of comfort, away from strangers. Yet here was Maya, quietly sitting, seemingly at ease. Finally, Robert could no longer contain his frustration. He pressed the call button above his seat, and the flight attendant appeared promptly. Her expression was polite but professional, ready to assist with any reasonable request. "Yes, sir?" she asked. "I want that passenger moved to another seat," Robert said, pointing at Maya. "I paid for first class, and I do not want her sitting near me." The flight attendant's calm voice replied, "Sir, she has a first-class ticket just like you. All seats in this section are assigned based on tickets. She has the right to be here." Robert's eyebrows furrowed. He did not expect this answer. In his mind, first class meant more than just a ticket. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice but trying to sound firm. "I do not care. Find her another seat. I should not have to sit next to her." Maya had heard the conversation, though she had not looked up immediately. She set her magazine aside and looked at him with steady eyes. Her voice was calm and clear as she spoke. "Sir, this is my seat. I have a first-class ticket just like yours. I am allowed to sit here and I would like to enjoy a peaceful flight." Robert blinked. He expected surprise or hesitation, but Maya's confidence caught him off guard. He leaned back slightly, searching for words, but nothing came easily. His frustration grew, but he also realized that yelling would not change the situation. The flight attendant stood between them, maintaining a professional stance. She added politely, "Sir, I understand your concern, but all first-class seats are paid for. It is not possible to move her without another confirmed seat. Please let her remain in her assigned seat." Robert clenched his jaw. He looked around the cabin, noticing that some passengers were watching the exchange quietly. He felt a small sense of embarrassment, realizing that his behavior was visible to others. Maya, on the other hand, remained composed, giving the impression of someone who had faced difficult situations before and knew how to handle them with dignity. Maya spoke again, this time with a gentle smile. "Sir, we can both enjoy our flight without conflict. I will sit quietly and respect your space, and I hope you will do the same." Robert paused. Her calm words had an effect he had not anticipated. He was used to people reacting with anger or fear, but Maya's approach was different. She did not argue or raise her voice. She did not insult him or complain. She simply stated the truth with confidence and grace. The cabin remained quiet as the flight attendant stepped away, giving both passengers some space. Robert stared ahead, feeling a mix of frustration and confusion. Maya opened her magazine again, focusing on the pages as if nothing had happened. Her calm demeanor made it clear that she was not intimidated by him, and that realization unsettled Robert. He tried one more time to think of an argument, but every idea seemed weak compared to Maya's steady composure. She had not raised her voice and she had not tried to provoke him. She had simply asserted her right to her seat and remained professional. As the plane flew steadily through the sky, Robert slowly sank back into his seat. He could no longer push Maya out or disrupt the situation. The reality was clear. She belonged in first class, and there was nothing he could do to change that. Maya continued to read quietly, occasionally glancing out of the window at the clouds below. She felt a sense of calm satisfaction, knowing she had handled the situation with patience and dignity. Robert's reaction, while frustrating, had not disturbed her peace. Around them, the other passengers settled into their routines. The gentle hum of conversation, the clinking of trays, and the soft whir of the air conditioning filled the cabin. The tension slowly faded, leaving only a quiet understanding that some lessons could only be learned through calmness and respect. The flight continued, and both Maya and Robert faced a journey that would not only take them across the sky, but also challenge their understanding of patience, confidence, and respect. The cabin of Flight 712 had settled into a quiet rhythm. Passengers were reading, chatting softly, or watching the clouds through their windows. Yet in the first-class section, tension lingered. Robert sat rigidly in his seat, glancing toward Maya every few seconds. He could not understand why she remained so calm despite his clear irritation. Maya, for her part, was focused on a small notebook she had brought. She liked to record thoughts and observations during her travels. Her pen moved smoothly across the pages as she wrote, occasionally pausing to glance out the window. The view of the sky, painted with soft shades of blue and white, gave her a sense of calm and perspective. Robert shifted in his seat. He had tried to get the flight attendant to move her, but she had politely refused. Every attempt to assert control had failed. He frowned, muttering under his breath, but Maya's steady presence made it difficult for him to raise his voice without drawing attention. Finally, unable to contain his frustration, Robert leaned slightly toward the flight attendant again. "Are you going to let her stay here?" "I don't want to sit near her." The flight attendant took a measured breath. "Sir, as I mentioned earlier, she has a first-class ticket. All seats are assigned based on confirmed tickets. She has the right to sit here. I cannot move her without another confirmed seat." Robert's face turned red with annoyance. He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, Maya looked up from her notebook. Her dark eyes met his, calm and steady, and she spoke in a quiet but firm voice. "Sir, I understand that you are upset. I am not trying to make things difficult. I only want to sit in my seat and have a peaceful flight. We can both enjoy this journey if we respect each other's space." Robert froze. He had expected an argument, perhaps surprise or fear, but not this calm, confident response. Her words were simple, yet they carried authority. She did not raise her voice. She did not insult him. She only stated the truth clearly and politely. The flight attendant smiled slightly, relieved that Maya had handled the situation so gracefully. "Thank you, ma'am," she said softly before stepping back to continue her work. Robert, however, was not used to being refused. His mind raced. How could someone sit there so calmly while he tried to demand control? He opened his mouth again, but found that no words came easily. Maya returned her attention to her notebook, writing smoothly as if his presence were barely a distraction. A few passengers nearby had noticed the tension. Some looked discreetly at Maya, whispering to one another about how composed she seemed. One older woman gave Maya a small approving nod, as if acknowledging the strength in her calm demeanor. Robert noticed this and felt even more isolated. Her composure had not only deflected his anger but also subtly won the quiet support of others. Maya closed her notebook and reached for her water. She sipped it slowly, maintaining her calm posture. Then she looked directly at Robert again, her expression kind but firm. "Sir, I'm happy to give you space. I ask only that you allow me the same courtesy. This flight will be smoother if we do not create unnecessary conflict." Her words were polite, yet they carried a quiet power. Robert shifted in his seat, realizing that nothing he did or said could disturb her peace. His frustration began to mix with confusion. He had expected to intimidate her, but she had met his anger with patience and confidence. For the first time, Robert noticed the soft murmurs of approval from other passengers. Some whispered quietly to each other about how unusual it was to see someone handle a situation with such dignity. Others simply watched, curious about how the encounter would unfold. The plane continued to glide through the sky, the hum of the engine steady and comforting. Maya leaned back slightly in her seat, enjoying the view outside, feeling completely calm. Robert sat forward, staring straight ahead, trying to process what had just happened. He felt a mix of embarrassment and admiration, though he would not admit it to anyone. The first-class cabin returned to a quiet routine. Maya's calm response had not only diffused Robert's attempts to dominate the space, but also influenced the atmosphere around them. Passengers who had been tense or distracted now focused on their own journeys, inspired quietly by the example of patience and dignity. Maya continued to write in her notebook, undisturbed by the earlier conflict. Robert, meanwhile, began to reflect on his behavior, though slowly and privately. The flight, which had started with tension, was gradually shifting toward understanding and quiet respect. The stage was now set for what would come next, a moment when patience and confidence would not only change the dynamic between two strangers, but also leave an impression on everyone in the cabin. The flight continued steadily above the clouds. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a soft glow across the first-class cabin. Maya sat quietly, reviewing some notes she had prepared during the conference. Her calm presence gave her a sense of control over her surroundings. She had handled Robert's earlier demands with patience and dignity, and she was determined not to let his behavior disturb her peace. Robert, however, was growing more restless. He shifted in his seat, clearly irritated that Maya had not been affected by his actions. Every time he tried to think of another argument, her composed demeanor silenced him. He stared straight ahead, frowning, but she continued to write and occasionally glance out the window at the sky. Nearby passengers began to notice the tension. A man in a navy suit whispered to his companion, "Look at her. She isn't even upset." The companion nodded, impressed by Maya's calm. Across the aisle, an elderly woman leaned slightly toward the flight attendant and said softly, "That man is being unreasonable. She has every right to sit there." The flight attendant, hearing this, kept her professional distance but paid close attention. She had dealt with difficult passengers before, but this situation was unusual. The passengers' quiet support made it clear that Robert's behavior was out of line. Robert felt their eyes on him. He looked around, noticing the subtle glances and whispers. The realization that others were observing his conduct made him uncomfortable. He tried to focus on a magazine, but his mind kept returning to Maya's calm face and the way she had handled the situation so gracefully. Maya, sensing the shift in the cabin, maintained her quiet composure. She did not speak to Robert again immediately. Instead, she organized her notes and placed them neatly on the small tray table in front of her. Her calm actions were deliberate, showing that she had nothing to hide and no reason to be intimidated. A young woman sitting across the aisle whispered to her friend, "She is so confident. I wish I could be like that when someone is rude to me." The friend smiled and nodded, her eyes returning to Maya. The passengers were quietly inspired by her example. Robert noticed the whispers and the glances, and his frustration began to mix with embarrassment. He realized that his attempts to intimidate Maya had not only failed but had also drawn attention to his behavior. Maya's confidence had turned the situation around in a subtle but powerful way. He opened his mouth to speak again, intending to demand action, but stopped when he saw Maya look up and meet his eyes. Her gaze was calm, firm, and unwavering. "Sir," she said gently, "we can both enjoy this flight. I will respect your space if you respect mine. There is no need for conflict." Her words, simple and polite, carried an undeniable strength. Robert sank back in his seat, feeling a mix of irritation and admiration. He realized that yelling or complaining would not achieve anything. The passengers nearby continued to watch quietly, now impressed with Maya's poise. The flight attendant returned briefly to check on both passengers. She smiled at Maya and said, "Thank you for remaining calm. It makes managing the cabin much easier." Maya nodded politely. Robert's eyes shifted away, acknowledging her comment silently. He felt a growing awareness that he had handled the situation poorly. For the next hour, Maya continued reading and writing quietly. Her calm presence influenced the entire first-class cabin. Other passengers, who had initially been tense, now relaxed. The subtle tension that had filled the section gradually faded. Robert, though still uneasy, began to sit quietly, reflecting on his own behavior. Maya's example demonstrated the power of patience and dignity. She had not raised her voice, she had not argued, and she had not allowed Robert's frustration to disturb her peace. Passengers nearby whispered quietly among themselves, noting the remarkable way she handled the situation. By the time the flight attendants served the in-flight refreshments, the cabin had returned to a calm, respectful atmosphere. Maya politely accepted her drink, thanking the staff, and Robert observed quietly. He could no longer ignore the lesson that Maya's calm composure had silently taught everyone present. The flight continued smoothly, and Maya remained focused on her journey. She had turned a tense encounter into a quiet example of patience and professionalism. Robert, on the other hand, could not stop thinking about the impact of her words and actions. The cabin had changed, not because of authority or force, but because of quiet confidence and respect. The flight was now high above the clouds, with the soft hum of engines creating a gentle rhythm throughout the cabin. Passengers were reading, resting, or quietly talking, and the tension from earlier had begun to fade. Yet in the first-class section, a quiet struggle of patience and understanding continued between Maya and Robert. Robert had been sitting in silence for some time, trying to convince himself that he was in control of the situation. He adjusted his tie and shifted in his seat repeatedly, but Maya's calm presence made it clear that he was not the one leading. She was reading quietly, her small notebook open, occasionally jotting down thoughts and seemingly unaffected by his earlier outburst. Robert took a deep breath and leaned forward slightly. "I just don't understand," he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. Why does she get to sit here? I paid for this seat. Shouldn't this space feel like it's mine? Maya looked up from her notebook and met his gaze gently. Sir, this seat is yours and mine is mine. We both have a right to be here. The flight will be more pleasant if we focus on our own journey rather than trying to control each other. Robert was surprised by her calmness. There was no anger, no defensiveness, only quiet reason. He blinked and leaned back in his seat, thinking about what she had said. Her words were simple, yet they carried a weight he could not ignore. The flight attendant passed by and smiled softly at Maya, noting her composure. She had seen many difficult passengers over the years, but Maya's calmness was remarkable. Nearby passengers were also noticing the change. A young man whispered to his friend, "Look at how calm she is. I wish I could handle people like that." Robert's gaze shifted to the other passengers, realizing that they had quietly supported Maya's right to remain in her seat. Their subtle nods and whispers made him feel a quiet awareness of his own behavior. He had tried to assert control through anger and demand, but it had not worked. Maya had met him with patience, and the passengers had silently observed her dignity. He took another deep breath, trying to calm himself. Maya returned to her notebook, writing a few more notes. She occasionally glanced at him with a gentle expression, not judgmental but confident. Her calmness began to have an effect on Robert. He noticed that he was no longer angry in the same way. Instead, he felt a mix of reflection and surprise at how peacefully she had handled the situation. The plane hummed steadily as the flight attendant served a light snack. Maya accepted hers politely, thanking the staff, and continued to focus on her notes. Robert tried to eat his snack, but his mind kept returning to the encounter. He realized that Maya's response had taught him something important. Strength does not always come from force or argument. Sometimes it comes from calmness and confidence. He shifted slightly in his seat, looking at her again. Maya met his gaze once more and smiled gently. "Sir," she said softly, "we all have challenges in life, and sometimes people will act in ways we do not expect. The best we can do is respond with respect and patience. That creates a better experience for everyone." Robert sat back and closed his eyes for a moment. Her words were simple, yet they carried a quiet truth he could not ignore. He had been focused on asserting control and protecting his own comfort, but she had shown him a different approach, one of dignity and patience. For the first time during the flight, Robert felt a sense of respect for her. He realized that trying to intimidate her had accomplished nothing, and her calm response had quietly taught him a valuable lesson. The passengers around them, sensing the shift, relaxed further. The cabin felt warmer, more peaceful, as if Maya's calmness had spread quietly through the space. Maya returned to her notes once more, her focus undisturbed. Robert, for his part, began to reflect quietly on his behavior and the impact of patience, confidence, and respect. The turning point had come not through argument or confrontation, but through calm and measured response. As the plane flew steadily above the clouds, the first-class cabin was filled with a quiet, respectful atmosphere. Maya continued her journey with grace, and Robert, though still learning, began to understand the power of composure and dignity. The encounter had changed not only the dynamic between the two passengers, but also the energy of the entire section. The plane cruised above the clouds, smooth and steady, and the first-class cabin had settled into a calm rhythm. Maya sat in her seat, focused on her notebook. She had been writing about the conference she had attended and was noting down important ideas to remember. Her calm energy seemed to radiate quietly through the cabin, affecting not only Robert but the passengers around her. Robert, for his part, had stopped arguing. He sat quietly, staring out of the window at the endless sky. The bright sunlight reflected off the clouds, creating patterns of gold and white that shifted as the plane moved. He took a deep breath, trying to clear his mind. Maya's calmness had not only frustrated him at first, but had also made him think. He began to reflect on his own actions, realizing how unnecessary his earlier behavior had been. He remembered the way she had spoken, with steady confidence, never raising her voice, never showing anger. That had been unusual for him. He was used to people responding with fear or defensiveness when challenged, yet Maya had remained composed, polite, and respectful. Robert thought about the passengers who had quietly noticed the situation, the subtle whispers and approving glances. He could sense their silent support for Maya's dignity, and it made him feel a little embarrassed about his own actions. Meanwhile, Maya continued to write and occasionally look out the window. She had handled the situation without any confrontation, simply asserting her rights calmly and confidently. Her behavior was a quiet lesson in patience, respect, and professionalism. Robert realized that she had not only defended herself, but had done so in a way that improved the atmosphere of the cabin instead of making it worse. He shifted slightly in his seat and watched her for a moment. Her focus and calm presence were impressive. Robert began to think about how often he had reacted with anger or frustration in his own life, trying to control situations that were beyond his control. Maya's example made him consider how patience and understanding could lead to better outcomes. He quietly admitted to himself that her behavior had taught him something valuable. Other passengers, sensing the shift in the cabin, began to relax as well. The earlier tension had faded, replaced by a quiet sense of respect for Maya. Some glanced at her with admiration, noting how she had remained composed under pressure. The young man who had whispered earlier nodded slightly at his companion, saying softly, "She is really impressive." The companion smiled in agreement, keeping her eyes on Maya with quiet appreciation. Robert noticed these subtle reactions and felt a sense of humility. He realized that his earlier attempts to assert control had not only failed, but had also been witnessed by others. Maya, however, had shown strength without aggression. Her calmness had transformed the situation from conflict into an example of dignity and patience. He leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes for a moment, reflecting deeply. Maya's words echoed in his mind. "We can both enjoy this flight if we respect each other's space." He realized that respect and patience could create harmony even in uncomfortable situations. For the first time, he felt a quiet desire to change the way he reacted in public. Maya glanced at him briefly, offering a small, polite smile. She did not say anything, but the gesture was enough. It was not condescending or judgmental. It was simply kind. Robert felt a small warmth in his chest, an understanding that perhaps he could have handled things differently. For the rest of the flight, Robert remained quiet, observing Maya's calm approach. He thought about how it had influenced not only him but also the passengers around them. He realized that sometimes the strongest response is not anger or force, but quiet confidence and respect. Maya continued writing in her notebook, undisturbed by the earlier conflict. She had turned a tense encounter into a lesson for herself, for Robert, and for anyone who had noticed. Her calmness had left a lasting impression, and the first-class cabin now felt peaceful and respectful. As the plane flew steadily through the sky, Robert quietly reflected on his own behavior, and Maya continued her journey with dignity and grace. The encounter had become more than just a disagreement over seats. It had become an example of patience, confidence, and respect that left an impression on everyone present. The plane continued to glide smoothly above the clouds. Maya sat in her seat, her notebook open, writing down her thoughts and ideas. Her calm energy had filled the first-class cabin with a quiet sense of order. Passengers nearby were relaxed, some reading, some chatting softly. The earlier tension seemed like a distant memory, replaced by the peace Maya's demeanor created. Robert, sitting across from her, had stopped fidgeting. He leaned back in his seat and stared out of the window, watching the clouds float by like cotton across the sky. He could not stop thinking about what had happened. For hours he had been frustrated, trying to assert control over a situation that did not belong to him. Maya's calm response had been completely unexpected. She had not argued, not raised her voice, and had not reacted in anger. Instead, she had spoken with clarity and confidence, showing a quiet strength that left him unsettled and thoughtful. He reflected on her words. "We can both enjoy this flight if we respect each other's space." Simple words, but they carried more meaning than he had realized. Respect, patience, confidence. He realized that these were qualities he had often overlooked in his own life. His attempts to control the situation through anger and demand had not worked. Maya's calmness had not only preserved her peace but had also influenced the atmosphere around them. A young passenger across the aisle whispered to his friend, "She really handled that well. I have never seen anyone stay so calm when someone is rude." The friend nodded. Yes, she didn't need to shout or argue. She just stayed confident and polite. Robert overheard this and felt a small pang of embarrassment. He recognized that the whispers were not mocking him but admiring Maya's composure. He glanced at her notebook and noticed how focused she was. She wrote steadily, occasionally glancing out the window. She had handled the entire situation with dignity and grace. Robert realized that her calmness was not just about the seat. It was a reflection of her character. She had earned respect through patience and quiet confidence rather than confrontation. Robert tried to remember the last time he had remained calm in a difficult situation. He struggled to recall such an instance. Most often, he had reacted with impatience or frustration. Now he saw the value in a different approach. Maya had shown him that strength was not about forcing someone to move or trying to dominate, but about maintaining composure and dignity. He shifted slightly in his seat and opened his notebook, one he had been using to jot notes for work. He hesitated, then wrote a few words: patience, calm, respect. He smiled faintly at the simplicity of the words. The lesson he had learned from Maya was clear, and he knew it would stay with him long after the flight ended. Maya glanced up briefly, offering a small, polite smile. She did not speak, but the gesture was enough. It was not patronizing or judgmental, only kind and calm. Robert felt a warmth in his chest he had not felt before. Her smile was a reminder that people could be strong without anger, and that quiet confidence could have a greater impact than any argument or demand. The flight attendants continued their work, serving snacks and drinks, but the first-class cabin remained peaceful. Robert watched Maya interact politely with the staff, noticing how naturally she maintained her composure. Every small action, from the way she spoke to the flight attendants to the way she adjusted her seat, reflected calm professionalism. Robert thought about how he could apply this lesson in his own life. He realized that patience and respect could solve conflicts more effectively than anger or demands. Maya had transformed a tense encounter into a quiet example of dignity, not only teaching him a lesson but also influencing the other passengers. For the remainder of the flight, Robert remained quiet, observing and reflecting. Maya continued her journey with focus and grace, fully undisturbed by the earlier conflict. The atmosphere in the cabin was calm and respectful, a direct result of her steady presence. As the plane moved closer to its destination, Robert felt a quiet sense of gratitude. He had not only witnessed a display of patience and strength, but had also learned from it. Maya's calm response had left a lasting impression, showing that dignity, confidence, and respect could change not only a situation but also the people involved. The plane began its slow descent toward the airport, the city below slowly becoming visible through the windows. Maya adjusted her seat, carefully closing her notebook and placing it in her small bag. She had spent the flight reflecting on the ideas from her conference and now felt ready to continue her work at home. Her calm and focused energy remained steady, unaffected by the tension she had faced earlier. Robert sat across the aisle, quietly observing the scene outside his window. For the first time during the flight, he felt a sense of reflection rather than frustration. The encounter with Maya had changed something within him. He thought about his behavior, realizing how unnecessary his earlier demands had been. He had tried to assert control with anger, but it had accomplished nothing. Maya's calm response had not only preserved her peace but had also influenced him in ways he did not expect. The cabin had settled into a quiet, respectful atmosphere. Passengers were finishing their meals, reading, or chatting softly. Some glanced at Maya with admiration, noticing how naturally she carried herself. Robert observed them too and realized that her behavior had left a positive impression on everyone. She had shown that patience, confidence, and respect could quietly inspire others. Robert finally spoke softly, not to Maya, but to himself. "I need to remember this," he said quietly. He thought about how he often reacted to situations with frustration, demanding control or recognition. Maya had taught him that strength was not always in forceful action, but in calmness and dignity. Her example had created a moment of reflection he would carry forward in his life. Maya glanced briefly toward Robert, offering a gentle smile. It was a simple gesture, polite and kind, and it conveyed more than words could. Robert met her gaze and nodded slightly, silently acknowledging her strength and the lesson she had shown. There was no need for further argument or explanation. The understanding was clear, unspoken yet powerful. As the plane touched down smoothly on the runway, passengers prepared to disembark. Maya stood, picked up her bag, and thanked the flight attendants for their service. Her calm energy continued to radiate as she moved down the aisle, politely greeting people she passed. Robert watched her walk with confidence and dignity, realizing that her calmness had not only diffused a tense situation, but had also taught him something important about respect and patience. When the doors opened and passengers began to leave the plane, Maya stepped into the terminal with a quiet sense of purpose. She was ready to continue her journey, both literally and figuratively. The lessons of the flight, though small in scale, had reinforced the values she already held: calmness, patience, and dignity in every situation. Robert lingered for a moment before leaving his seat. He thought about how easily he had allowed frustration to cloud his judgment, and how much he had learned by observing Maya. The flight had been a turning point for him, a reminder that respect and patience could change not only the atmosphere of a room, but also the people within it. Passengers who had witnessed the encounter continued on their journeys, some quietly discussing what they had seen. Many remarked on Maya's calm and confident response, noting how it had transformed a potentially unpleasant situation into a lesson in dignity and professionalism. Her actions had left a lasting impression on everyone who had observed them, showing the quiet power of composure and respect. Maya exited the terminal, stepping into the sunlight. She felt a sense of calm satisfaction. The flight had challenged her patience, but she had handled it with grace. She was ready to continue her work, knowing that even in unexpected situations, calmness and dignity could make a difference. Robert walked out of the plane behind her, carrying a quiet reflection with him. He had learned a lesson in patience and respect, understanding that true strength often comes from calmness rather than conflict. Maya's presence had not only influenced him, but had also subtly impacted the passengers around them, leaving a lasting impression of professionalism and quiet confidence. As the airport bustled with activity, life continued for both Maya and Robert. One had maintained her calm and focus, while the other had learned the power of reflection and respect. The flight had ended, but the lessons it carried would continue to resonate, reminding everyone involved that dignity, patience, and confidence could transform even the most challenging encounters into moments of growth and understanding.